Hollywood's golden age gave us unforgettable beauty, charm, and glamour. But behind the red lips and platinum curls, some actresses were dismissed as dumb blondes or airheaded ingenues. This isn't just about being unintelligent. It's about how image, choices, and public perception shape their legacies. Today we uncover 21 golden age actresses who were considered the dumbest, but whose stories reveal far more than meets the eye. Marilyn Monroe. She had the world at her feet, but few took her seriously. Marilyn Monroe was Hollywood's ultimate blonde bombshell, but behind her dazzling smile was a woman often treated like a joke. Studios cast her in roles that emphasized her naivety. Gentlemen prefer blondes, the 7-year itch. Some like it hot, each one reinforcing her image as the clueless beauty. But Monroe wasn't dumb. She studied at the Actors Studio under Lee Strasberg, read Dostoevsky and Freud, and formed her own production company to gain creative control. Yet no matter how hard she worked, the press and even her co-stars saw her as scatterbrain. Laurence Olivier reportedly grew frustrated filming The Prince and the Showgirl, calling her unprofessional and mentally weak. Critics often focused more on her breathy voice than her depth. She flubbed lines, showed up late, and battled severe anxiety, all of which fueled the narrative that she wasn't bright enough for real acting. In truth, Monroe was suffering, fighting typecasting, depression, and a male-dominated industry that didn't respect her intellect. Her tragic death at just 36 cemented the image of the tragic, broken blonde. But it also froze her in time as the symbol of wasted potential. Many saw her as the dumbest for not protecting her fame better, but history now views her as a victim of a system that never let her be anything else. Jayne Mansfield. Jayne Mansfield made being dumb look profitable. Dubbed the working man's Monroe, she leaned heavily into the ditzy persona with strategic intent. But the line between act and reality blurred fast. With her baby voice, outrageous curves, and penchant for publicity stunts, Jayne often came off as silly, even ridiculous. She was the queen of wardrobe malfunctions, appearing at press events where her dress would accidentally fall open. She was smart, spoke 5 languages, and had a reported IQ of 163. But you'd never guess it from her on-screen image. Films like The Girl Can't Help It and Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter showcased her comedic timing, but reinforced her as a one-note joke. Critics and even fellow actresses dismissed her as brainless. She once said, "I don't know why people think I'm dumb. I speak 5 languages and have 4 children." But the industry had already labeled her. She was hired to play the fool, and eventually her career suffered as audiences grew tired of the act. Her tragic car accident at 34 ended a career already in decline. Jayne's legacy is tangled. She was never truly dumb, but she played the role so well that even today, people struggle to see the woman behind the wiggle. Mamie Van Doren. Mamie Van Doren was marketed as one of the 3 M's, Marilyn, Mansfield, and Mamie. But in the race to mimic Monroe's success, Mamie often got the short end of the stick. She was beautiful, busty, and had a knack for being seen in all the right places. But the roles she was given were paper thin, casting her as the punchline rather than the star. She starred in B-movies with titles like Sex Kittens Go to College and Teacher's Pet, where her job was to look hot and act helpless. She delivered breathy lines like, "I don't know much about politics, but I sure like the color red," and audiences laughed for all the wrong reasons. The studio system didn't push her talent. It exploited her image. And as a result, Mamie was quickly seen as a Marilyn knockoff, dumber, cheaper, and less refined. Off camera, Mamie was anything but dumb. She spoke out about sexism in the industry and later wrote a raw, tell-all memoir that revealed the abuse and objectification she endured. But by then, the damage had been done. Her early image stuck like glue, and her association with sleaze films overshadowed any serious work she might have pursued. Though she continued to work sporadically, she never escaped the dumb blonde label. Hollywood had written her off as little more than a giggling, jiggling stereotype, and audiences followed suit. Even today, she's remembered more for her measurements than her talent. Proof of how branding a woman as dumb could limit her legacy forever. Zsa Zsa Gabor. Zsa Zsa Gabor wasn't cast for talent. She was cast for attitude, accent, and audacity. The Hungarian-born socialite-turned-actress dazzled with her charm and glamour, but critics rarely praised her performances. She appeared in films like Moulin Rouge and Queen of Outer Space, often playing caricatures of herself, wealthy, vain, and comically unaware. Her accent made her sound whimsical, even foolish to American ears, and she played it up. She once quipped, "I'm a marvelous housekeeper. Every time I leave a man, I keep the house." Her one-liners were iconic, but they painted her as materialistic and shallow. The press loved calling her dizzy, lightheaded, and frivolous. Zsa Zsa leaned into her dumb reputation, appearing on talk shows with exaggerated wit and endless stories about her 9 marriages. Her film career took a backseat to her public persona, one that didn't require much acting, but demanded consistent flamboyance. The truth? Zsa Zsa was clever, calculating, and understood fame as performance art. She made herself the punchline and profited from it, but the cost was clear. No one took her seriously as an actress. Even at her peak, she was more tabloid queen than screen queen. And while she achieved enduring fame, it came at the expense of being remembered as one of Hollywood's most lovable fools. Judy Holliday. Judy Holliday's portrayal of ditzy blondes was so convincing, many believed she was exactly like the character she played. In Born Yesterday, she played Billie Dawn, a seemingly brainless showgirl being educated by a reporter. Her performance won her an Academy Award in 1951, beating out both Bette Davis and Gloria Swanson. But rather than being praised for range, she was typecast, because people genuinely believed she was that naive. In reality, Holliday was a brilliant woman. She reportedly had an IQ of 172 and was a master of sharp, fast-paced comedic delivery. She was fluent in multiple languages, loved classical music, and could discuss philosophy with the best of them. But none of that mattered in Hollywood. Her intelligence threatened the illusion, and studios preferred she stay in the dumb blonde box. Even the government doubted her complexity. During the Red Scare, she was called before the Senate to testify about alleged communist ties. She outwitted her interrogators by pretending to be the dimwit they'd seen on screen, giving vague answers in a deliberately slow voice. Her performance confused and disarmed them, and she walked away unscathed. Despite her Oscar, Judy's career never soared the way it should have. The industry couldn't reconcile her intelligence with her image. She eventually turned to theater and music, but by then she was emotionally worn. Cancer claimed her life at just 43. She was never truly dumb, but the tragedy was that her brilliance had to be hidden to survive. Hollywood celebrated her for being convincingly stupid, and then punished her for being smarter than everyone in the room. Marie Wilson. Marie Wilson built her entire career on playing lovable airheads, most famously in the radio, television, and film versions of My Friend Irma. As Irma Peterson, she was sweet, clueless, and prone to ridiculous misunderstandings that made audiences laugh but critics wince. She became synonymous with dumb blonde humor, and it stuck like glue. Her timing was impeccable, her innocence endearing. But Marie was never asked to stretch her talents. In Satan, Met a Lady and Boy Meets Girl, she delivered the same breathy, confused charm, and casting directors saw little reason to try anything new. She was safe, predictable, and pigeonholed. Behind the scenes, Marie was nothing like Irma. She was a perfectionist, a devout Catholic, and deeply committed to entertaining troops during World War II. But none of that made headlines. Audiences only saw the dizzy dame, who once said, "I avoid serious acting. It makes my head hurt." The sad irony? Her dedication to comedy required intelligence and skill, but she was denied that recognition. When television evolved and tastes changed, Marie's style of humor became passé. She faded into obscurity, remembered not for her effort, but for her empty-headed characters. She died young, at 56, her reputation as a lovable idiot intact. But those who knew her swore she was sharper than anyone guessed. She just never had the chance to prove it. Alice Faye. Alice Faye had a voice that could melt hearts and a face made for the silver screen, yet she was often painted as slow-witted. Known for musicals like Hello, Frisco, Hello, and Alexander's Ragtime Band, Faye was frequently typecast as the sweet, unassuming girl next door, a role that didn't require much depth, only warmth and charm. Her performances were often so understated that critics assumed it was due to lack of skill rather than deliberate choice. Her voice was sultry, her movements gentle, and her expressions serene, giving the impression that she was more singer than actress, and perhaps not too bright either. In real life, however, Alice Faye was fiercely intelligent. She walked away from 20th Century Fox at the peak of her career after Daryl F. Zanuck minimized her screen time in favor of Linda Darnell. It was a power move no dumb woman would dare to make. She chose family over fame and maintained dignity in a business that thrived on control. She later said, "I learned you can't fight the system forever." And she didn't try. But that choice allowed the myth to live on, that she had simply disappeared because she lacked the brains or talent to keep up. Alice Faye's career could have soared to deeper dramatic roles, but the nice but dim label stuck. Hollywood didn't look past the quiet beauty to see the mind behind the music. By the time they realized her worth, she was long gone from the spotlight. Joy Lansing. Joy Lansing was everything the 1950s loved: blonde, busty, and beaming. But those very qualities sealed her fate as one of Hollywood's most underestimated talents. Cast in shows like the Beverly Hillbillies and films such as Touch of Evil, Lansing always played the decorative blonde. Never the lead, never the thinker, always the eye candy. Her characters were often written with two traits: pretty and clueless. Producers adored her look, but gave her little room to grow. She was told to just smile and hit her marks, and she did, flawlessly. But behind the glittering image was a woman who desperately wanted more. She took acting seriously, trained in voice and drama, and worked to develop her skills. But the industry had no interest. Once compared to Jayne Mansfield and Mamie Van Doren, she was deemed the dumbest of the trio for lacking the same buzz or charisma, even though her work ethic was unmatched. Joy tried to shake the label by doing stage work and more serious roles, but Hollywood had already decided her fate. She was the beautiful background noise in scenes that never let her speak her mind. Off-screen, she suffered in silence, frustrated by an industry that never gave her a real shot. She died tragically at just 43 from breast cancer. Largely forgotten by the time of her passing, her beauty became both her curse and her prison, proof that in Golden Age Hollywood, if you looked the part of a dumb blonde, no one cared to look deeper. Dagmar. In the early 1950s, late-night TV had a rising star, Dagmar, born Virginia Ruth Egnor, who captured America's attention with her statuesque beauty and hilariously slow-witted persona. She rose to fame on Broadway Open House, television's precursor to The Tonight Show, playing a buxom blonde with blank stares and absurd responses. Audiences howled with laughter, but few recognized how intentional the act was. Dagmar didn't stumble into her dumb character. It was a strategic performance crafted with precision. With her pouty lips and saucer eyes, she made dumb look divine and profitable. She was one of the first TV personalities to parlay sex appeal into stardom. But the price of her fame was the same old trap. Once you played dumb, people assumed you really were. Despite being quick-witted in real life, Dagmar couldn't escape her TV alter ego. She guest starred on game shows and sitcoms, always playing variations of the same character, giggly, airheaded, and blissfully unaware. She once joked that she wanted to be dumb enough to keep getting jobs. But behind the scenes, Dagmar was deeply frustrated. She longed to be taken seriously, to transition into drama or musical theater, but the industry refused. She had created a Frankenstein of a public image, and it consumed her. Her career fizzled as the novelty wore off, and her later years were quiet, largely removed from the fame that once defined her. Dagmar's tale is a cautionary one. When Hollywood brands you as dumb, even if you're in on the joke, the label sticks, and eventually it silences everything else. Marie McDonald. Dubbed the body by the press, Marie McDonald was another beauty whose fame eclipsed her perceived intelligence. A former beauty queen, she transitioned into films like Lucky Jordan and Living in a Big Way, but rarely got credit for her acting. Critics called her wooden. Studios labeled her difficult, and the public saw her as just another ornamental blonde. Marie's screen roles didn't help. Whether playing vapid nightclub singers or clueless girlfriends, she was never allowed to show depth. Her breathy voice and exaggerated mannerisms fed the narrative that she was dim-witted. Behind the scenes, Marie fought desperately to be seen as more, but her efforts backfired. She staged a bizarre kidnapping in 1957, claiming she was abducted by strangers and dumped in the desert. Police later suspected it was a publicity stunt. The press branded her crazy and pathetic, reinforcing the idea that she was not only dumb, but unstable. Marie's personal life didn't escape scrutiny either. With multiple marriages, custody battles, and erratic behavior, the gossip columns painted a picture of chaos. Her acting career never fully recovered. By the time she died of a drug overdose at 42, she had become a punchline in the very town she once dazzled. Marie McDonald wasn't the dumbest actress. She was a woman crushed by the system's expectations. But Hollywood loves to simplify, and she was simplified right out of her own legacy. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton's career was a Greek tragedy wrapped in fur and lipstick. She had all the raw materials of a leading lady: blonde hair, sultry eyes, and a smoldering screen presence. In films like Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye opposite James Cagney, she showed flashes of serious promise. But Payton quickly became better known for her personal life than her performances. She bounced between high-profile affairs with stars like Franchot Tone and Tom Neill, an infamous love triangle that ended in violence and tabloid frenzy. Her choices were public, reckless, and humiliating. Hollywood labeled her a mess, a dumb broad who couldn't control herself, her money, or her mouth. The worst part? Barbara was smart. She knew exactly what was happening to her, but addiction and desperation dulled her ability to fight back. She wrote a haunting memoir, I Am Not Ashamed, that laid bare the destruction wrought by fame, betrayal, and abuse. But by then, her days as a starlet were long over. Barbara became a symbol, not of talent wasted, but of stupidity punished. She died penniless and alone, a cautionary tale used to mock rather than mourn. The public called her dumb, but the truth was far darker. She was broken. Marilyn Maxwell. Marilyn Maxwell had a voice like velvet and a face that could stop traffic. She starred in popular films like Champion and The Lemon Drop Kid, often alongside Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. But despite her regular screen presence, she was never considered a serious actress. Instead, she was viewed as just another leggy blonde with a vacant smile. Part of the problem was her persona. In interviews, she seemed flighty and distracted. Studio PR portrayed her as ditzy but lovable, the type who couldn't locate Paris on a map but could light up a room. Her off-screen relationships, most notoriously with Hope, added to the gossip that she was more arm candy than artist. Maxwell never got the prestige roles. She played chorus girls, nightclub singers, and decorative love interests, with few lines and fewer chances to showcase emotional depth. She was fun, flirty, and reliable, but easily replaced when newer, shinier blondes came along. Her career fizzled out quietly, and she died young, at just 50, from heart failure. Despite her success in musical comedy and stage reviews, she was never given credit for more than her curves. The industry had decided early on that she was not very bright, and never bothered to see if that was true. Joan Shawlee. You might not recognize her name, but you definitely remember her face. Joan Shawlee was the towering, wisecracking blonde who played Sweet Sue in Some Like It Hot. She had a knack for playing loud, goofy women whose brains lagged a few beats behind their mouths. And while her timing was flawless, the roles rarely asked for anything more than slapstick and sass. At 5 feet 9 inches, Joan often played the comic foil, the big dumb blonde who disrupted the scene with a booming laugh or a misplaced punchline. She became a staple of TV sitcoms and second-string roles, where her presence alone was the gag. The characters she portrayed were over-the-top and oblivious, and eventually that image stuck to Joan herself. Despite being a skilled comedic actress, the public and the press rarely credited her intelligence. She was boxed into a stereotype that offered little range or respect. Her performances were memorable but never award-worthy, because they weren't supposed to be. Shawlee was a consummate professional, admired by colleagues and directors for her work ethic. But the dumb label clung to her career like glue. She spent years being the joke, never quite in on it. And when she passed away from cancer in 1987, her contributions were largely overlooked, another casualty of Hollywood's shallow assumptions. Cleo Moore. Cleo Moore was Columbia Pictures' answer to Marilyn Monroe, but without the protection or polish. She was cast in a string of low-budget noir films, like One Girl's Confession and Bait, where she played desperate women with empty eyes and breathless voices. Her characters were sexy, yes, but also directionless, naive, and painfully unaware. Off-screen, she wasn't much different in the eyes of studio execs. Cleo was told to keep her opinions to herself, smile, and never question a script. She once tried to run for political office, and the media laughed her out of the spotlight. "What's next, Miss Bubblehead in the Senate?" one columnist joked. Her film career ended abruptly when she refused to play dumb anymore. Columbia dropped her, and the offers dried up. Unlike Monroe or Mansfield, she didn't have enough fame to fight back or reinvent herself. She simply faded, labeled as too dumb for drama, too old for cheesecake. Cleo Moore's career serves as a bitter reminder. In 1950s Hollywood, beauty came with a sell-by date, and if you were stamped dumb early on, you were disposable. Noel Neill as Lois Lane in the 1940s and 1950s. Superman serials, Noel Neill was every kid's introduction to a damsel in distress. But instead of being remembered as a pioneering female character in superhero media, she was often dismissed as ditzy and overly dependent on the Man of Steel. Noel didn't help her case in the public eye. She was soft-spoken, modest, and never took her fame too seriously. While George Reeves, her Superman co-star, earned respect as a leading man, Noel became a pop culture footnote. She was rarely offered roles beyond the helpless reporter who constantly needed rescuing. Even when she returned for cameos in later Superman films, she was cast as background nostalgia, not as a serious actress. Critics remembered her for being pretty, polite, and perpetually wide-eyed. Behind the scenes, she was smart and well-read, but producers never saw past her signature scream. In a cruel twist, her gentle personality was interpreted as emptiness. She lived a quiet life after her career ended, never chasing stardom. But the dumb Lois image endured, proof that even in fantasy, women weren't allowed to be both beautiful and intelligent. Vera-Ellen was one of the most talented dancers of the Golden Age, starring in musicals like White Christmas, On the Town, and The Belle of New York. Her steps were flawless, her timing impeccable, yet when the cameras stopped rolling, she was treated as ornamental. While Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly were hailed as choreographic geniuses, Vera-Ellen was simply the pretty partner. Part of the misperception stemmed from her quiet nature. She rarely gave interviews, never sought controversy, and appeared socially timid. In an era when bombastic personalities drew attention, her soft-spoken presence was misunderstood as a lack of intellect or depth. Even her gentle, fragile voice added to the assumption. Her roles, too, didn't help. She played women who danced beautifully but rarely spoke with substance. In White Christmas, she barely had lines and played second fiddle to Rosemary Clooney. Despite being the best dancer on screen, she was the least developed character. Off-camera, Vera-Ellen was struggling with deep personal trauma and an eating disorder, which may have contributed to her reserved demeanor. But instead of compassion, the industry treated her like a silent doll, beautiful, obedient, and unintelligent. As musicals waned in popularity, so did her career. No one could imagine her in a serious role. Vera-Ellen's story is a heartbreaking example of how talent alone couldn't save a woman from being labeled dumb if she didn't speak loudly or act seductively. She was a quiet genius in a loud, shallow town, and she paid the price. June Wilkinson. Nicknamed the Bosom in the late 1950s, June Wilkinson was a British model-turned-actress who was thrust into the Hollywood limelight for one reason: her body. She appeared in Playboy, titillating magazine readers, and soon found herself in a string of forgettable B-movies with titles like Macumba Love and Career Girl. Her characters were almost always dim-witted, sexualized props. She played the kind of roles where her lines were less important than her lingerie. The stereotype hardened. She was beautiful but brainless. Her heavy accent and lack of formal acting training made it easy for critics to dismiss her. Hollywood loved to flaunt her, but it never allowed her to evolve. June tried to branch out. She did live theater, nightclub performances, and even produced, but the damage was done. When she wasn't cast for roles, she was invited to appear at parties, photo ops, and red carpet events. Not as an actress, but as a living mannequin. She once said, "I knew what they wanted from me. It wasn't my words." That self-awareness proves she wasn't dumb, but her image left her powerless to redefine herself. Wilkinson remains a symbol of a time when a woman's beauty could be both her golden ticket and her greatest cage. Lili St, Sear Lili St. Sear wasn't a traditional actress. She was one of America's most famous burlesque dancers, and she starred in a few low-budget films that leaned heavily into her sensual image. Appearances in films like Son of Sinbad and French Peep Show gave her screen time, but not substance. She was frequently cast as the dumb blonde temptress, a caricature of feminine excess. Her sultry voice, coy glances, and exaggerated mannerisms made her memorable but easy to ridicule. The press treated her like a joke, sexy, dumb, and disposable. Yet behind the scenes, Lili was a meticulous businesswoman. She designed her own costumes, choreographed her routines, and managed her brand with precision. She understood the power of spectacle and leaned into it, but the public saw only a stereotype. She wanted to be taken seriously as an actress, but never broke past the burlesque barrier. Her acting was dismissed as campy or shallow. Her intelligence, her savvy, her ambition, all erased behind the plumes and sequins. Lili St Sear was never dumb, but Hollywood made sure no one ever saw the woman behind the glitter. Beverly Michaels. Beverly Michaels specialized in playing tough but dumb blondes in low-budget noir films like Pick Up and Wicked Woman. Her screen image was built on sexual manipulation and stupidity, creating a femme fatale with no real plan. Audiences laughed at her delivery, and critics dismissed her as wooden. Her performances often felt exaggerated, but that was the point. Beverly leaned into the sleaze, creating characters that were campy, brazen, and yes, clueless. But it also made her an easy target. Directors called her difficult, critics called her talentless, and audiences saw her as just another joke with legs. But Beverly wasn't trying to be dumb. She was trapped in a genre that demanded women be oversexed and underbrained. When she tried to land more nuanced roles, she was rejected. She quit acting by the mid-1950s and disappeared into private life. Her performances have since been reevaluated as cult classics. But during her time, Beverly Michaels was written off, another dumb blonde who could have done more if she'd been given half a chance. Virginia Mayo. Virginia Mayo was a top box office draw in the 1940s, co-starring with legends like James Cagney in White Heat and Danny Kaye in Wonder Man. But despite her success, Mayo was consistently treated as a lightweight actress. Her roles were often decorative: wives, singers, girlfriends, rarely women with complexity or intelligence. She brought glamour and sparkle, but few expected gravitas. As a result, Mayo was seen as just another pretty face. She often played women who were weak-willed or hopelessly clueless. The press labeled her adorable but dim, and even in interviews she was steered away from serious topics. Behind that smile was a smart, articulate woman who understood her limitations in the studio system. She once said, "I had the looks, not the lines." She wanted more, but the studio locked her into fluff roles, and she played them well, to her own detriment. Virginia Mayo wasn't dumb. She was stuck in a system that wouldn't let her prove otherwise. Judy Canova. Judy Canova was the hillbilly clown princess of early Hollywood, known for her exaggerated Southern twang, big toothy smile, and corn-fed comedy. She made her mark in radio in films like Sis Hopkins and Sleepy Time Gal, where she played the part of the rural simpleton with gusto. Audiences roared at her antics, but nobody mistook her for a dramatic powerhouse. Critics dismissed her humor as lowbrow and her talent as niche. The dumb hillbilly act that made her famous also boxed her in, making it impossible to land any role that didn't require a pie to the face or a banjo in hand. But Judy was anything but dumb. She controlled her brand, had a long-running radio show, and turned her fame into a business. Still, the character she created became her prison. People believed she really was that backwoods bumpkin, and that perception followed her long after the spotlight faded. Judy Canova played dumb to perfection. Sadly, Hollywood never allowed her to play anything else. They called them dumb, but what they really feared was their brilliance hidden behind beauty and charm. These actresses were far more than their roles, trapped by typecasting, yet unforgettable. Their stories deserve to be remembered not for mockery, but for the silent battles they fought beneath Hollywood's unforgiving spotlight.